Hello everyone. Welcome to Tri-Cities Historical Museum's next virtual lecture, 150 Years at Akeley, Snapshots of a Century and a Half at 200 Washington. My name is Erin Pilarski, and I am the Education Curator and Volunteer Manager here at the Tri-Cities Historical Museum. So a little bit about what we are talking about today. We are currently celebrating 150 years of the Akeley Building. And part of that, we've created this lecture to discuss the past 150 years. We're going to be reviewing Huey Akeley, a little bit about his background, and how he was a very influential Grand Haven individual. We're going to be discussing businesses and buyers of the Akeley Building from the past. And we're also going to talk a little bit about the museum, past and present, and some unfortunate things that may have happened, and we'll be able to show you some images of that as well. Huey Akeley was born on March 16th, 1836 in Stowe, Vermont. When he was growing up, he studied law, and he studied law at a firm called Dillingham and Durrant, and that was located in Waterbury, Connecticut. He later studied law at a school in Poughkeepsie, New York. And he didn't move into Grand Haven until about 1858. And when he did, he kept busy. And when I say that, he made sure that he was a notable public individual for Grand Haven. He served as Justice of the Peace and Circuit Court Commissioner for 2 years. He helped develop the lumber and shipping industries, and he was a major stockholder of the Grand Haven Lumber Company. He, from the years 1866 to 1880, was customs collector for the United States government. He also was named director of the First National Bank of Grand Haven. And Akeley also partnered with a gentleman named Captain Thomas Kirby, and together they owned Kirby and Akeley Shipping Building. He even had a steam barge named after him, H.C. Akeley, and that was built in 1881. And he later donated his household along with some cash to establish the Akeley School for Girls. So he was a very busy man. He wanted to see this town prosper. Now, I forgot to mention that Mr. Akeley, he had enlisted in the 2nd Michigan Cavalry on October 23rd, 1863, and he was promoted to first lieutenant and captain, but then he was discharged on August 17th, 1865. So after he had been discharged, he took $13,000 and he bought a bunch of land just outside of Grand Haven's village limits for building sites. And I believe that 200 and 202 Washington, as they are now, was some of the land that he had bought with that money. At this location, he erected the Akeley Building, and that was in the year 1871. And it was a very intricate 2-story frame. And it was nicknamed the Akeley Block. And this new structure was to house retail establishments. On the inside of the building, currently, you can still see lumber beams that was from the Akeley sawmills. And you can look closely at these beams and you can see how the workers had used an axe to shape these beams. They're huge, and it is such a nice feature to the building and it's also nice that we still have that in there. Rumor has it that some of these beams has Akeley's initials stamped into them. I've been here for 2 years and I have yet to find that, but feel free to come into our museum and take a look around at those beams and see if you can spot them. So, in 1871, Akeley Building is built and it is awaiting its first business opportunity, and that is where Nathaniel Slayton comes in with Slayton's Dry Goods Store. Nathaniel Slayton was born on September 15th, 1838 in Stowe, Vermont. In the year 1858, he visited Grand Haven and absolutely fell in love with the area, so he moved here. In 1862, he was the clerk at Dwight Cutler's store, and in the year 1871, he had partnered with Willard Sheldon to open up a dry goods store, and that dry goods store was in the Akeley Building. However, it was short-lived due to health reasons. I'm not exactly sure what kind of health reasons they were, but he did have to close. He did open up another store in 1873, on the Cutler block. So it was the same block, just a few doors down. And if you look at the picture to the right, you can see one of those stores right there, one of the stores that he owned. And that is also a picture of Nathaniel Slayton. Now, Willard Sheldon, you've probably heard that name before. Willard Sheldon was the owner of the Magnetic Mineral Springs that is located where Jumping Java is now. Willard Sheldon and Nathaniel Slayton had family ties. So Willard Sheldon was the husband to Mary Slayton, which was Nathaniel's sister. Also, you may have heard the name Dwight Cutler. Now, Dwight Cutler had the Cutler House Hotel right across the street from Willard Sheldon's Mineral Springs. He also had some family ties with Nathaniel Slayton. Now, Cutler was married to Frances Slayton, who was also the sister to Nathaniel Slayton. So they had a lot of family ties there, and that probably helped with the partnerships with owning a business. We have here Dudley Watson with Watson's Dry Goods. Now, Dudley Watson was born on April 10th, 1859, and he was a native of New York, but in the year 1867, he did move to Coopersville. Dudley Watson was one of the original incorporators of the Highland Park Association in 1886, and he was also appointed by President Grover Cleveland to become Michigan's collector of customs from the years 1885 to 1889. Being a dry goods merchant ran in the family. His father, William, was also a dry goods merchant in Coopersville, and then Dudley eventually took over the business, and he also was a merchant in Utica. Then around the year 1880, maybe a little bit before that, he opened up the dry goods store at 200 Washington, and it ran about 10 years until about 1890. Unfortunately, I was unable to locate a picture of Dudley Watson in our collection. However, I did find a picture of his wife, Winnie. So Winnie was daughter of Martin Walsh of Spring Lake, and Dudley and Winnie were married in the year 1880. Again, I couldn't find a picture of Dudley, but Winnie is at the picture to the far right. I also have a picture of Highland Park, since he was one of the original corporators in 1886, and I did find a bank statement from Watson Dry Goods. And took a look right there. Cornelius and Addison II with Addison and Company. So Cornelius Addison was born in Syracuse, New York on November 1st, 1860. At the age of 20, he worked as a clerk in Fremont, Michigan, and later was employed in sawmills of Muskegon. And he had dedicated his life to store ownership. In the year 1887, Addison had opened up a grocery store in Fruitport. Unfortunately, that was short-lived because in 1889, just 2 years later, it had burned down. In the year 1890, an opportunity came about, and he became partners with John M. Cook, a gentleman from Grand Haven, and they opened up a grocery store at the location of 123 North 3rd. Just 2 years later, however, Cornelius Addison decided to sell his half of the store back to Cook, and he went into business on his own and opened up Addison and Company at the Akeley Building at 200 Washington. And that was in the year 1892. And Addison and Company specialized in selling dry goods, fancy goods, toys, and bizarre goods such as carpets, curtains, housewares, wallpaper, and even ladies' garments. So here are two photos that I found in our collection of Addisons. And you can see the main level of Addison's was dedicated to retail. The upstairs, however, was more so for offices for lawyers. And at one point, there was a barber shop. If you take a look at the far right photo, you're going to see a sign that says Dr. H.T. Cummings, Dentist. There was a dentist office upstairs in the Akeley Building. I'm not entirely sure where upstairs it was located, but that sign proves that there was a dentist here. Here are some other items that I found in our collection. The photo with all the people here, these were all clerks that worked at Addison's and Company, along with Mr. Addison himself. He's right here in the center. I found a bank statement from the National Bank of Grand Haven with the signature Addison and Company, and that is dated 1897. On the bottom right, I found a receipt for $10.52 in the year 1909 from Addison's Bazaar. So after Cornelius Addison II, in came in William Baltz. Now, William was born in Kansas on January 22nd, 1889. He had worked at F.N. Arboth as a manager in Lansing, Michigan. In the year 1925, he did move to Grand Haven, and 3 years later, in 1928, he became part owner of Addison's. Following his purchase of half of Addison's, the name changed to Addison and Baltz. In the year 1950, Baltz sold the department store business, but kept the real estate. Now, I'm not entirely sure if William Baltz is in this image to the right. However, if you look in the background, you will see a vehicle with his name on it. So I can only imagine that he had owned that vehicle. Looks like they're having a fun time, picnicking, possibly in Highland Park. I don't know. Here are some other items that I found in the collection. There's an image of the storefront, Addison and Baltz Company. And then there's also a jewelry box with the name Addison Baltz. I also found a price tag for 29 cents from Addison Baltz. I can only imagine nowadays paying 29 cents for anything. Boy, have times changed. Also, I found a light fixture from Addison Baltz that used to be hanging in the Akeley Building. As the Baltz family wanted to retire, the ownership of the company changed once again, and this time to a gentleman named Paul Oltmann. Now, Paul was born on June 24th, 1908, and he originally worked at a company called Herpelsheimer Company in Grand Rapids. In 1950, around the same time that he moved to Grand Haven with wife Elizabeth and two kids, Shirley and Paul II, he had bought Addison and Baltz department store from the Baltz family. So even though ownership changed once again, the name remained the same and operations were largely unaffected. Paul Oltmann only owned Addison and Baltz department store for about 8 years because he unfortunately died unexpectedly May 28th of 1958. I could not locate a photo of Paul Oltmann in our collection. However, I was able to identify a photo of Paul II in a, looks like a school photo. So if you take a look to the photo to the right, number 26, that is Paul II, which is Paul Oltmann's son. So the people of Grand Haven and surrounding areas would refer to Addison and Company by a variety of different names. It is kind of like how it is today when people refer to Meijer as Myers or J.C. Penney as Pennies. Something similar with Addison and Company. People would refer to Addison and Company as Addison's, Addison and Company, Addison's Bazaar, Addison and Baltz department store, and simply Addison and Baltz. If you're ever looking through our collection for more information on Addison and Company, chances are any of these names would bring up some information on Addison and Company. So do take into consideration any of these names for your research. So after Addison and Baltz came in Steckety's. Now, Steckety's of Grand Rapids purchased Addison and Baltz in the year 1958, just after Paul Oltmann passed away. They leased the Akeley Building from the Baltz family. Soon after they purchased Addison and Baltz, they had changed the name to Steckety's of Grand Haven. In the year 1965, Steckety's purchased the space at 204 Washington Avenue, which was once the home of The Style Shop, a clothing and beauty store owned by John and Esther Greibinger. Now, Steckety's decided to modernize the inside and outside of the building. Now, if you take a look at this image, it does look a little bit different than it did previously. However, Steckety's decided to remove some of the windows and brick it up. And you can see the image right there after it's been modernized. I also found a few other images in our collection of the time when it was Steckety's. If you take a look at the image up top, you can see a storefront window. And that window display is from the 125th anniversary of Grand Haven. And I believe it was a women's club display. If you go farther right, you'll see a group of children singing Christmas carols in the stairwell of Steckety's. Below those images, you'll also find a gift box with the label Steckety's, Grand Rapids, Grand Haven. In February of 1991, Steckety's sold its 6 stores to a company called Dunlop Company of Fort Worth, Texas. Now, Dunlop Company was founded as a small general store around 1890 by a gentleman named H.G. Dunlop of Wagner, Oklahoma. At one point, he consolidated his general store with his son's store named Dunlop Brothers, which was a positive action considering it then expanded to 20 stores. They hired a man named Retha R. Martin. He was supposed to manage one of the last remaining stores in Oklahoma before the Dunlop family decided to retire and move to California to open up a new group of stores. Martin was to kind of manage that store until they were to close it down. However, due to his leadership skills, they were able to keep open that one Oklahoma store because it was doing so well. Martin also contributed to Dunlop Company purchasing other businesses. And some stores acquired by Dunlops were Goldstein Miguel of Waco, Texas in 1976, the White House of Beaumont, Texas in 1986, and Steckety's of Grand Rapids, Michigan in 1991. So all 6 stores in 91 were sold to Dunlop Company. And if you take a look at the right, I have listed out a bunch of the other stores that they purchased. And you can notice that a lot of them are from Texas. There's some from Tennessee, Virginia, Kansas, Missouri, and then Michigan. Now, I couldn't really find the connection to how Dunlop Company heard about Steckety's. I'm not quite sure what that connection is. I'm sure there has to be one. However, I could not really locate that. So Dunlop Company took over ownership in 91 and unfortunately closed Steckety's of Grand Haven in April of 2000, 2 years after Steckety's of Grand Rapids closed. Things turned for the worse in 2007 when Dunlop Company and all accompanying stores went out of business. So here's just a recap of the business timeline from the Akeley Building. Akeley built it in 1871, and the first business to come in here was Slayton's Dry Goods Store. The second one was Watson's Dry Goods Store. Then in came Addison's. Addison and Baltz was next, and it did eventually change ownership to Paul Altman. Then in 1958, Stackety's came in after Paul Altman passed away, and that also changed ownership to Dunlop Company in 91. But where did it go after Stackety's? Well, it became the Tri-Cities Historical Museum. Sadly, that didn't happen right away. The Akeley Building sat vacant for at least 2 years. In the year 2001, the Akeley block was formally broken up into the 2 separate addresses. So now we have 200 Washington Avenue and 202 Washington Avenue. Previously in this presentation, however, this is the point where the Akeley block now has those 2 addresses. So 2001 formally broke up, and 202 Washington was purchased. So a storefront would be on the lower level, and then the upper level would be apartments. In the year 2002, the Tri-Cities Historical Museum saw this property as a potential location to expand its exhibits. So they purchased 200 Washington Avenue from the Baltz family for around $600,000. And it was then time to move on over to the Akeley Building. And as you can see in those photos to the right, they are remodeling. So Stackety's, as I mentioned, Stackety's had modernized the outside of the building. Well, Tri-Cities Historical Museum wanted to bring the building back to its historical glory, wanted to show off those windows and the beautiful architecture. And that's what they did. But Lady Luck is not always on our side. In the year 2003, during the period of construction to reconfigure the front of the building back to its glory, there was a fire. So the front of the building caught on fire. It was very unfortunate at the time. However, we are lucky that none of the artifacts were inside the building yet. So it was all structural damage rather than loss of artifacts. And here are some photos of the fire right there. And then I do have some more. They do look devastating, but it was not a complete loss. And they were able to fix the fire damage and still make it look like it did years and years ago. And there's another photo right there. And this is what we are today. We are the Tri-Cities Historical Museum. Exhibits opened up in this building around the year 2004, and all offices for staff members moved in around the year 2014. The depot was then configured into more of a business location. I know there are a few stores and ice cream shops in there now. And the city has taken a lot of time to fix up the depot to make it look like it was years ago. So that historic preservation is still going strong in this town. At the Tri-Cities Historical Museum here at the Akeley block, we are creating connections to local history. We see around 50,000 visitors annually. Of course, that is pre-COVID times. Things have changed a little bit, but we cannot wait for more visitors to come in the next few months to a year. Our education department is involved with 100% of public and private schools in Grand Haven, Spring Lake, and we're reaching out to schools within Fruitport and Robinson Township. We also partner with Ottawa Area Intermediate School District, so we are interacting with hundreds of school children each year. We also have a selection of permanent exhibits on the main floor, and then upstairs in the Akeley Building, we have temporary exhibits. Our main Centennial Hall exhibit goes up once a year around the summertime, and then we have a small gallery that changes twice a year. We also have a gallery in our mezzanine that changes often as well. Now, we can't have a local history museum without the artifacts. We have about 65,000 artifacts within our collection. The sad part is we cannot fit 65,000 artifacts within the museum at 200 Washington. That is why we have a second location called the Community Archive and Research Center. This center is a safe haven for those artifacts that need to be properly stored for future viewing and for future research. If you ever wanted to visit the Community Archive and Research Center, you may do so by visiting 14110 172nd Avenue in Grand Haven. I thank you for taking the time to listen to this presentation on the 150 years of the Akeley Building. My name again is Erin Pilarski. I am the Education Curator and Volunteer Manager at the Tri-Cities Historical Museum. If you have any questions at all about this lecture or about anything in particular involving Grand Haven, Spring Lake, and Ferrysburg history, please email me. My email is epilarski@tchmuseum.org. Again, thank you so much for joining. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and stay tuned. We have virtual lecture series coming up. The next one will be on queer history in West Michigan. That will begin sometime in June. And we also have an interesting shipwreck lecture series coming up in the fall. Again, stay tuned for more lectures coming your way. Take care.